There is no famine in Gaza. There never has been a famine in Gaza. That's because there is no limit on how much aid can enter Gaza. Gaza aid is literally overflowing. 700 trucks are now uncollected by the UN inside Gaza right now. Whoever wants to send aid into Gaza can send aid into Gaza. There's a group of food security experts called the IPC. They keep warning of a future famine, but they also admit there never has been a famine in Gaza. That means they're saying their own warnings of famine have been proven wrong every single time, according to their own reports. The IPC's definition for famine is 3,000 to 6,000 people dying of hunger every week. Not even Hamas is claiming that is happening. Israel is flooding Gaza with so much aid, the UN is drowning under it. Instead of pretending there's not enough aid being let into Gaza, the UN needs to start doing its job and collect the overflowing aid. The UN needs to scale up or shut up. To anyone who thinks there should be more food in Gaza, Israel says, send more food. Send more food. 2 border crossings into northern Gaza alone, Erez West and Erez East, can accommodate 600 trucks per week. That's nearly twice what all of Gaza was receiving before the October 7th massacre. All of Gaza was receiving 60 to 70 truckloads of food a day before Hamas's attack. In September, 3,457 truckloads of food entered Gaza. That's 2 to 3 times as much food as before. Israel is trying to help international organizations distribute aid, including by repairing and paving roads, supplying empty trucks and forklifts, extending crossing hours, and coordinating humanitarian pauses in combat operations. All this while fighting the war Hamas started. It's not just that at any given point there are 700 trucks awaiting collection by the UN. There has also been a backlog of hundreds of trucks every day for weeks. There has been a backlog of aid trucks for most of the war, at precisely the same time that the UN and others have been complaining about a supposed aid shortage. There are reports that Qatar has told Hamas to get out. This would be positive news if they get sent out on a one-way flight to the United States to face justice. Qatar has leverage over Hamas. It must arrest its leaders, not let them escape. Qatar pretends that it's a mediator between Israel and Hamas, but Qatar is not neutral. Qatar is Hamas's agent, or maybe Hamas is Qatar's agent. Qatar condemned Israel on October 7th as Hamas's massacre was ongoing. Qatar has never condemned Hamas for anything. It's obvious that Qatar told Hamas to keep the hostages until Hamas gets a deal that allows Hamas to remain in power in Gaza. We all saw the video of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh celebrating the October 7th massacre on October 7th from his luxury hotel suite in Qatar. Qatar kicking out Hamas now is too little, too late. Qatar should be keeping Hamas under arrest. Qatar should be extraditing Hamas to face justice. We'll now take questions from our audience watching live on social media.
Thank you, Eylon. There are reports that the Americans are saying that Israel risks jeopardizing U.S. weaponry if Israel cannot show that it has improved the supply of humanitarian aid to Gaza. What is standing in the way of more supplies of humanitarian aid to Gaza?
At the same time the US made that threat, it also acknowledged that the aid supply has improved into Gaza. Since Hamas launched the October 7th war, it has secured new entry points of aid into Gaza. New crossings by land, airdrops from the sky, and even briefly deliveries by sea. Israel is telling the international community, if you want to get aid into Gaza, send it. We'll let it in. But there's a problem. Hamas keeps hijacking aid. The trucks go in, Hamas takes over. That's why aid that was meant to reach people for free, they're having to pay for. Because Hamas takes it, keeps what it needs for its fighters, and then sells the rest on the black market. That's how Hamas is still fueling and funding its own war machine. by stealing the international aid that your countries are supplying. Now, it's difficult to supply humanitarian aid in a war zone, and that's because it's a war zone. In order to coordinate the delivery of trucks into a place of active fighting, you need a mechanism to stop the fighting. We're talking about delivering aid into areas where Hamas is still shooting and is probably still holding hostages. So Israel is making clear to the international community, we want aid to get to the people of Gaza, but it has to, 1, go through real UN agencies, not a Hamas front like UNRWA, and 2, enter in a way that makes sure Hamas cannot steal it. Because as long as Hamas remains the governing power in Gaza, it will continue to be able to hijack aid to fuel its war machine. Countries that want to ensure that the people of Gaza have adequate supplies need to commit to the fall of the Hamas regime that is stealing aid from people in need.
I'm going to combine 2 questions from our Instagram Live. If Hamas has been kicked out of Qatar, what does that mean in terms of ending the war and getting our hostages back? And now that Qatar isn't part of the negotiations anymore, who's at the table? What can we expect?
For now, Hamas has not been kicked out of Qatar. There is a media report that Qatar has asked Hamas's leaders to leave, but that is yet to be confirmed. Israel is welcoming the move, saying that Qatar has not been playing a constructive role in the negotiations. Clearly, it has failed to deliver the goods. One possible alternative mediator is Egypt, who could take over the role that Qatar has been failing to play. But we need the world to be putting pressure on Hamas and its backers, Qatar, Iran, and Turkey, to let the hostages go now. Because Hamas is trying to hold on to the hostages as an ultimate insurance card to ensure that they will survive the war that they started, and that after freeing the hostages, they will regroup, rearm, retrain to take more hostages tomorrow. And that's why we need global pressure on the countries that are backing Hamas to let the hostages go, so that Israel can achieve a deal on the terms that will allow it to protect its own security.
Following up on that question, we have a question from Naomi on Instagram Live. What kind of pressure can be placed on Qatar and Hamas, which will effectively lead to the release of the hostages, all the hostages in one stage? What does pressure look like?
Thank you, Naomi, for your question. Qatar is not a normal country. It should stop being treated like a normal country. In just a few weeks, the Emir of Qatar is going to pay a state visit to the United Kingdom and to be received by King Charles. It is unconscionable that the leader of a regime that has been hosting the leaders of a terrorist army that is still holding a British citizen hostage, Emily Damari from Kfar Aza, should be received like royalty by the British royal family. Every country around the world must map out the leverage that they have on countries like Qatar, like Iran, like Turkey, and tell Turkey you can either host Hamas leaders or be a member of NATO. You can't be both. Pressure, sanctions that can be placed on these countries make it clear they have a responsibility to force Hamas to let the hostages go and not allow them to pretend that they are being useful facilitators of peace and stability in the region. They have a role to play, and that role is by squeezing the terrorist army they are allowing to preside on their own territory, and until then they should not be treated like normal countries by any member of the international community.
This is a question from Lenore on Instagram Live. Can you talk about the pogrom in Amsterdam? What happened there? It's devastating.
Yes, really shocking images coming out of Amsterdam of what appears to have been a premeditated attack by Arabs and Muslims in Amsterdam against Israeli fans. It is true that before the match, there were racist chants and acts of hooliganism by Israeli fans. They should be condemned. There is no room and should be no tolerance for acts of hooliganism and racism by fans. But that was not the trigger for the attack that was by all means premeditated. Afterwards, the Israeli National Security Council had to put out a shocking warning. It had to urge Israelis to shut themselves in their hotel rooms and not leave, to hide any symbols of Judaism or Israeli identity if they had to leave their rooms, and to try to get back on the first possible flight home. It is a scary reminder. This is what globalize the Intifada means. Globalize the Intifada is a call for violence against Jews and Israelis wherever they can be found. Anyone who has been going around the world, around the streets of Western cities, chanting globalize the Intifada, this is what it leads to. And this is the logical conclusion of a vicious campaign that seeks to paint Israel as the ultimate actor of evil and as committing genocide. Because if you genuinely believe the lies that are being told about Israel, if you genuinely believe that Israel is evil, then the only moral, rational, and logical response is to treat Israelis just like they did in Amsterdam. And that is why it is so important for everyone watching now to use your voices to speak up for Israel and against the lies being told about Israel, so that those lies cannot continue to fuel the sorts of racism and violence and fuel into the same jihadi triumphalism that saw the Amsterdam pogrom. And we hope that all countries around Europe and indeed around the world will take this threat of homegrown extremism very, very seriously.
Our last question today comes from our live stream from someone who's been watching your own social media, your own travels. What did you experience in Canada? What was your trip like? And did you encounter any anti-Semitism there?
Thank you for your question. I'm just back from a speaking tour in Canada together with Stand With Us Canada. We went from coast to coast, Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, and Montreal, to meet Jewish communities, to visit the high schools, and most importantly, to visit campuses as well, where I heard from students what they're experiencing. Canada has a problem. Canada has a problem of a homegrown domestic extremism problem that is not only against Israel, it is openly pro-Hamas. I'll tell you about a personal experience that I had at the University of Calgary, where the protesters realized that I was coming, blocked the main door of the event, banged on the door shouting Allahu Akbar, and we had to be smuggled out of the back entrance. I think all of us can agree, protest anything you want about a war, but shouting Allahu Akbar crosses the line from political protest into an open jihadi war cry. Things got even worse in Montreal, where keffiyeh-clad, masked protesters with Palestinian flags camped out outside the synagogue, the Shar Shamayim synagogue, in violation of a court order that required them to stay at least 50 meters away. And when the event ended, for the first time ever, the people in attendance at that synagogue had to be asked to go out through the side entrance or the back entrance in order to avoid the protesters out front. And I think that's a reminder that this fight is not just a fight for Israel. It's a fight for the safety and security of the diaspora, and a fight for the soul of Western countries as well. That's why Canada's opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, tweeted about that incident in Montreal, because he recognizes that masked mobs outside a synagogue are a threat not to Israel, and not only to Canada's Jews, but to Canada's vision of itself as a safe, warm, liberal, inclusive, tolerant country. And we hope that these horrible incidents will make people wake up to the extent of the domestic extremism threat and act before it's too late. Okay, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much for tuning in. We will be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. Israel time, which is back to 8 a.m. Eastern. From the Citizen Spokesperson team, stay safe.